thank you so much for joining me for today's video. So while I was going to college and getting my degree in musical theater performance, I actually got the opportunity to study abroad in London for 3 months from roughly the end of January to mid-April in 2016. It was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, and a younger, more impetuous me probably would have moved to the UK by now. Part of my love for London stems from the old soul that I was either born with or learned to have from watching years worth of Britcoms and Masterpiece Theatre every single weekend. One of the greatest classes I took while I was there was called British Women Writers. Take a guess what we studied. In the class, we studied several forms of literature that have been produced by women who lived in the UK, going as far back as Queen Elizabeth's speech about the Spanish Armada in 1588, and going as recent as contemporary writers in the 2010s who primarily focus on what it's like to be an immigrant in the UK. Of course, that means we covered some of the greatest writers to ever grace the planet, the Bronte Sisters. The class primarily focused on Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, but we also covered bits and pieces of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I don't recall us covering much of Anne's work, but it was also 2016. My memory might be starting to go. Somewhere in all of the boxes I've packed up to eventually move is the book that I actually use for class. So one day I'll be able to confirm my suspicions if I can ever find the book again. Anyway, the point is that the Bronte sisters were my favorite subject to cover other than Virginia Woolf. So you can imagine how excited I was when I found out that someone wrote a period mystery where the Bronte sisters actually acted as the amateur detectives. The Vanished Bride by Bella Ellis is, as far as I can tell, the author's debut work, and was published with Berkeley Publishing House, which is an offset of Penguin Publishing, in September of 2019. It wastes no time getting interesting, as the prologue actually introduces us to Charlotte in her later years, alone now because her entire family has essentially passed away. As Charlotte sits alone on a dark, windy night, thinking of her family, she recalls the greatest adventure that her sisters and her ever went on. Which never actually happened because, this is historical fiction. Set in 1845, the Bronte sisters hear tale of a peculiar and terrible tragedy that has struck not far from their hometown of Haworth. Elizabeth Chester, the wife of a wealthy landowner Robert Chester, has disappeared from her home, and the only trace left behind is a large pool of blood in her bed. The Bronte sisters live together in their father's parsonage home along with their brother Bronwell, and this is the first time that they've all lived together since they all reached adulthood. The sisters are quite bored, and they're desperate to look for any type of work to subsidize their writing careers. Or just anything that can kill the boredom. So they are instantly interested in this mystery that has fallen at their doorstep. But boredom isn't the sisters' only motivation for solving the mystery. A school friend of Charlotte's actually works on the Chester estate as the governess to Robert Chester's 2 sons, one who was from a previous marriage, and one who was recently born to the now disappeared wife. In fact, it was that school friend of Charlotte's that discovered that Elizabeth Chester was missing, and she also discovered the pool of blood. So now at least Charlotte, if not all of the sisters, has a personal interest in solving the mystery. Anne and Emily are also just curious to find out what happened to Elizabeth Chester, especially after they find out that Robert Chester's first wife committed suicide by jumping from the ramparts of their home. A lot of gossip has been spread about that incident. The local constable is nowhere close to finding out who the real killer is because he's off following a bunch of gypsies who were camping on Chester's property around the time that the disappearance happened. The governess and the Bronte sisters are unconvinced that the gypsies are involved in any way, shape, or form. Whether driven by a love of a friend, or curiosity, or peer pressure, the Bronte sisters are all roped into becoming the detectors of Elizabeth Chester's case. The investigation takes them all throughout Chester's home, all around his property, and even to some neighboring towns, so that they can find out just what happened to Elizabeth Chester, and whether or not she is alive. Was it simply an out-of-control husband? Or perhaps it was a past lover, angry that he was passed over for a rich man? Or was it Elizabeth herself, who left of her own accord and left only the pool of blood behind to make everyone think that she was murdered? The book is written in limited third person and switches point of views between all three of the Bronte sisters. Each sister has their very distinct personality, making it very simple to keep them straight in your head. Charlotte is wise and realistic, but hardened by a life experience in Brussels. Emily is brash and blunt, but wildly adventurous. Anne is the quiet, gentle soul who is more likely uncomfortable with any of the more trespassing investigations that the sisters have to make. I'd say that Emily is my favorite of the sisters, just because of the risks that she takes in the book. She reminds me most of the woman that I want to be, while Anne reminds me more of my natural state. Another really cool thing about this book is that it even includes the often overlooked brother of the Bronte sisters, Branwell. This brother is so often overlooked by history that even a portrait of the Bronte sisters, now aged with time, shows that there was actually supposed to be a fourth figure in the portrait, most likely Branwell, but was ultimately painted over. During The Vanished Bride, Branwell is struggling with a scandal and a broken heart that ultimately led to him and his sister Anne being fired from their previous jobs. These emotions that Branwell is struggling with take him everywhere from the tavern, to gambling houses, to friends' houses, and he rarely is seen sober in the book. Such destructive behavior makes his three sisters very worried. Of course, their father, a man of the cloth, worries about all of his children, Branwell for his drinking habits, and his daughters for their lack of future when he is dead and gone. The investigation does nothing to settle his worrying mind, and he doesn't even know the full story of the investigation. So, how was this book as a mystery? That's a little difficult to describe. Did I see the end coming? Yes and no. I predicted some aspects of the ending, but the culprit was kind of up in the air for me until about halfway through the book. That was when I got a theory that I was really excited about. And that theory was kind of right, but kind of not. And then there was a red herring that made me go, holy shit! And then there was another red herring that made me go, holy fuck! Once all of the theories had been explored and the red herrings had all been caught and released, the final solution was both predictable and way out of left field. Basically, 50% of the solution couldn't be solved by the audience because there were no clues to that 50%. Or if there were clues, they were very few. There's really no other way for me to put it. Was it a successful mystery? I'd say it did anywhere from 80 to 90% of the job that a mystery is supposed to do. My favorite part would have to be when Emily sneaks into the Chester Grange estate and sees some really weird shit. My least favorite part would have to be the ending when the culprit is brought to justice. It just felt like an unsatisfying ending. I would give this book 4 stars out of 5, and I would recommend it to any young or new adult who likes historical fiction or mysteries or both that particularly focus on strong women. That's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, don't forget to bitch slap that like button. And while you're at it, why don't you bitch slap that subscribe button? My book, Starforged Orion, and my play How Are You, are both available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. Starforged is also available on Barnes & Noble's website. If you want to find other ways to support me, why don't you go ahead and check out my Patreon. I'm just saying you can become a beta reader if you wanted to. And don't forget to check out my other social media sites if you want more content. Toodles!